Okay, I'll take the recording in progress as my cue. Let's kick this thing off. I'm Dominic Sale. I am the chair of the programs committee for the Customer Experience Community of Interest in ACT-IAC. This is my second year on the committee. I think we have an exciting program for you today. I want to spend a minute or two to talk about the program committee, the COI, what we're trying to do, and set some context for a great discussion today. So this is the third event we've held so far this year. The first two events were actually solely members of the programs of the COI leadership team. And we spent those programs, and we'll drop a link. Thank you, Nancy. Drop the links in the chat so you can check those out. We're trying to get an idea. One of those was filmed right before inauguration, and one of them about a month after. So what we tried to do with those sessions was give an idea of where this is all heading in this new world that we're in. So definitely check those out. As a program committee, though, we decided that now is the time. This is kind of the second quarter we're heading into. We're going to make a pivot programming-wise, and we're going to start pulling in outside guests. Where we have, through a lot of discussion, we've decided that we really need to kind of get back to the roots, get back to CX, the business case for CX. There's a lot of people wondering where CX is heading. As many of you know who have been steeped in this, in the first Trump administration, CX was introduced in a lot of ways, the EO, the CX COI. We know this is a very bipartisan issue, but it's important that we make sure it resonates. And in that way, we know that CX was born out of the private sector, out of commercial practices, as just a good way to run your business, to make it more profitable, make it more efficient, make it more successful, all the things. So we really want to bring those practices into the discussion at the beginning, kind of starting in this second quarter of our programming for the COI. So today is the first of those sessions, and I'm excited to announce that we have Judy Weader, from Forrester, who is steeped in the topic and has studied CX upside and down within the commercial world. And what I'm hoping today is that we, inside the government sphere, can take those practices and be able to talk the talk, walk the walk of what CX is at its roots. It's just a really good business practice. So I want to, this session today is going to be a little different from past sessions. We normally, in the past, last year, we'd had a lot of panels. Today, we have one speaker and Judy. And so she will spend the first 30 to 40 minutes talking about, just on her findings, kind of just a lecture format. And then we'll enter into a Q&A after that. Steve Loika, a very active member and friend on the CX programming committee as well, put this session together. He's going to introduce Judy, and then he'll lead and moderate from this point forward. After the 20 minutes-ish for Q&A, we'll hit an hour. Judy will be off the clock. If she decides to stick around, we'll have a half an hour of free form. We'll be off the record. Recording will stop at an hour. And those who want to stick around, I will make myself available, kind of have a little more of a networking session. We can talk about, maybe ask questions of each other. Okay, so I am going to pass it right now to Martha Doris. I think for many of you, Martha needs no introduction. And Martha's then going to pass it off to Steve to kick off the session. Martha has an event that she wants to talk about for the CX COI related to call centers. But I am going to just leave it in that. Please check out these videos. Also, if you're interested in getting involved, if you're not already signed up and you are interested in or want to sign up and get involved in putting some of these sessions together in the future, please reach out to me. You can DM me. You can reach out to me, copy maybe Nancy Delanoche to make sure you get on the list. We love you. The more involvement, the better. There's more people we have involved who are active, the more we can do to bring this important topic to government. So without further ado, I'm going to pass off to my friend, colleague, mentor, idol, Martha Doris. Martha, take it away.
Thanks, Dominic. I just wanted to let everybody know, contact centers play a pivotal role in delivering digital experiences and an omni-channel experience. And there has been no contact center focused conferences around government contact centers, at least in the Washington, D.C., DMV area. So ACT-IAC and I, along with Carasoft, are partnering to have a one-day summit on April the 30th on contact centers, the role they play, best practices, what is a best-in-class contact center, what's the future of contact centers, some both, private sector, government examples, and it's available for registration on the ACT-IAC website, and we'll put the link in there. And if you have a story you want to tell or be involved in the planning, um, let us know. You can contact me, Martha at Doors Consulting, or cmiller at actiac.org. We'd love to have, as many people involved and participating as possible. So thanks, and I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Martha. I appreciate it. And I won't take too much time with my introduction, but as Dominic had alluded to, the first couple of sessions of the year have been focused on the evolving operating context and operating environment. And what we're trying to do going into the spring is to get back to the roots, as Dominic said, and really talk about how we establish the foundations for successful CX programs. What does that look like? And Judy Weader, who is a principal analyst at Forrester Research, we used to work together way back in the day, is focused on just these topics, right? Establishing, scaling, maturing CX programs. She has experience working across industries, but also, as I'm sure she'll talk about a little bit, is focused on government CX and the value that CX brings to government, and actually has some research that she's going to be working on in the spring going into summer. And so I think this is going to be a really great event to kind of bridge commercial and government best practices around CX and talk about how you position the value of CX to your organization, whether it be in a commercial environment or a government public sector environment. And so with that, I won't take too much more time. I'll introduce Judy Weader here and let her get started. And then as we finish with the prepared content, we'll get into, as Dominic said, the Q&A. And so please don't forget to put your questions in the chat. I'll be tracking those as we go, and then be able to pose those to Judy as we get towards the end here. So take it away, Judy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. Thank you to everybody for having me. This is a very cool event that I was not necessarily expecting to have on my bingo card for this year. So it's very, very, very nice to get to be invited to this. So let me get into share mode so I can show you some slides. Because what would a Forrester presentation be without some slides? So just to follow up on what Steve and Dominic had said. So I am a principal analyst on the CX research team at Forrester. I've been with the company for at this point 9 years, and I've been an analyst for a little bit more than half of that. As it happens, my coverage area does in fact include government. I focus on everything you need to establish, fund, and scale. So CX vision, strategy, prioritization, governance, the ROI of CX, which is going to be today's topic. And then because I have experience in both the healthcare sector and in government, I write about consumer experiences in the healthcare world, and I also write about government customer experience. So I sort of cover a lot of different things. I work with folks at all different levels of maturity, and it means I get to have some really interesting conversations and certainly bring the things from the private sector into the public sector space, which is kind of cool. And one of the reasons why it's so neat is because I'm a native. I was born in the District of Columbia at Columbia Hospital for Women, which I think has since been turned into condos or something like that. But I'm a native Washingtonian, and I spent a lot of time in the DC area and know the metro inside and out. So that's the context that I grew up in. My mom worked at Energy forever. The third retirement finally took, and those of you who've been in government for a while know how that works. And then it was sort of the honor of my life to then come back after I got my bachelor's degree and begin my own career in public service. So I started off as a government contractor working at the National Library of Medicine on their land support help desk, did that for a few years, worked at the Presidential Inaugural Committee in '97 for Bill Clinton's second inauguration. And then I went into the private sector for a while and came back into public service and worked at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston for a number of years. And one of the projects I worked on for the longest time that I was there was for Treasury and Defense Finance. So really spent a lot of time in the public sector, public world. And then, of course, got to circle back to that when I came to Forrester and got to serve government clients and write about their experiences and what they're going through and try and support them. So you could say that government has been a part of my life basically since I was born. But in addition to that, my very first job ever was actually working for the government. This here is the original Silver Spring Library building in Silver Spring, Maryland. And that was where I got my very first job when I was 13 years and 9 months old. As soon as I could get a work permit, I went and I applied for that job and I got it as a library page. And so here's me going around the library and I'm shelving books and I'm organizing magazines and I'm taking old magazines off the shelves and doing all the stuff that's needed to make sure the librarians can focus on all the higher function and higher order tasks. Now, they had also told us, you're not allowed to help the patrons. So one could say I was already kind of a rebel from a very young age because I just couldn't stand it. Here I am. I know where all the books are and I know where all the magazines are because I'm the one who's putting everything away. So if a patron comes by and says, hey, I'm looking for this thing, if I happen to know exactly where it is, why can't I just walk them over to it? Why can't I go help them with it? And so I kind of sort of did that. And the librarians occasionally would get annoyed and most of the time just sort of let it slide. Because customer experience has always been in my blood. But I mean, obviously, then you put it together with government and here you are. So that was my very first job, right? Formative years. And of course, now that library no longer is a thing in that location. And it's now this new shiny hotness that's in downtown Silver Spring and has like a basketball court and there's also like indoor track. There's all kinds of things going on here. So they've certainly brought up their game a little bit, but it still has that same community feel and it's there to serve the people of Silver Spring. And that's sort of always been the mission. So, right, customer experience in government. And when we talk about customer experience, it tends to be really soul feeding. When I was working at a health insurer, I knew that even though health insurance isn't always the most customer friendly thing in the world, the things that I was doing were helping even one person a day get easier access to the healthcare that they needed to live their lives. And so like, this was my mission. That was the thing that got me out of bed every morning. I'm helping someone. And so there's a lot of really very like touchy-feely kind of stuff about customer experience, right? Customer experience is great because it enables us to do good for others and to make it possible for others to have great experiences. So we can look at it and say, it's a thing that we should be doing because it's just the right thing to do. And that's great. But when we actually have to justify our salaries, the salaries of the other people that are working with us, the technology that we need to be able to do all the good and wonderful things, it becomes harder. And you can't just use the excuse of, but it's the right thing to do. Because even when you know something is the right thing to do, that doesn't mean that you can always afford to do it. So as much as it's the right thing to do, you have to be prepared to explain how customer experience is leading to better business outcomes. And when I say business, it doesn't necessarily just have to be about the private sector and we think about the profit motive. It's just organizational outcomes, the things we're trying to achieve that as an organization we must do. Customer experience has to help with that. It can't just be CX for CX's sake. When we focus on CX for CX's sake, executives tune us out. And I talk with C-suite leaders all the time. I talk fairly regularly with folks on boards of directors. And what they want is, how is this going to help us be more successful as an organization? And if you come at them with a chart that shows what your NPS is or your CSAT or your E's or whatever, they're eventually just going to look at you cross-eyed because it's kind of sort of meaningless to them. What's the difference between an NPS of 50 and an NPS of 56? Maybe nothing, maybe something, but you have to do the math to figure it out. And so if there's one thing that you take away from all of this, I want you to be aware of the fact that regardless of which CX metric you're using, you can't pay a salary with an NPS with a satisfaction score, with an ease score, whatever. So you have to be able to craft a story that's meaningful, that's measurable, that's something that an executive or someone, depending upon who you're working with, whether it's a member of Congress, whether it's someone who's higher up within your agency or organization, whether it's someone from an outside agency, whatever it may be, it has to be something that they can say is important. So we start by making it measurable and meaningful. Let me break that down a little bit. We talk about measurable. This is literally the stuff that you can count. So this is going to be things like money or units of product, anything where you can quantify it. And a reasonable person should be able to connect those dots. They should be able to see how the thing that you're talking about, like, we can lean 30 hours out of this week-long process. Great. Okay. So now I think, well, I could probably free up a whole person to do something else. They should be able to make that connection. So you have to have it quantified in some way that they can connect to it, whether we're talking about hours, a specific number, a percentage, something reasonable like that. You also want it to be meaningful. When I say meaningful, this is where we get, if we say that the measurable part is where the head comes in, the meaningful is where the heart comes in. And this is where we're talking about things that are of personal value to the individual that you're trying to influence, that you're trying to get on your side. So these could be pieces of the strategy that they've been told that they need to lead. It could be a personal passion or a legacy. It could be something that's related to a very specific goal that's been established or part of the mission for that particular agency or organization. And so how are you connecting that to a thing that they care about? You could think of this as the what's in it for me. And when you put these two things together, now you've quantified, here's what we're trying to achieve, and here's what we think we can do, and here's why this matters to you personally. So you're making a much more compelling case than if you just sort of come at them and say, well, we can improve our NPS or we can improve our ease score. Like, it's great, but what does that mean for them? Now, in the private sector, this ultimately resolves as three primary business case levers for any CX improvement. You can increase your revenue, you can reduce your cost, and you can increase your firm's resilience. And you can think of this as improving customer experience helps your organization make more money, save more money, and future-proof itself. Revenue can come in lots of different ways, right? We could be talking about things where you're bringing in money from existing product. Maybe you're doing enrichment. You're able to sell more things. Maybe you're able to raise the prices or bring on more customers as a result of having improved a customer's experience. Same thing for reducing costs in terms of reducing the cost to sell, reducing the cost to serve, just being more efficient. This is where we talk about things like Six Sigma. We're going to reduce the waste in whatever the processes are so that we're able to then take that money and bank it and use it for other stuff, or potentially just not have to spend it, which is also really great. And then resilience is this really big kind of squishy bucket. Resilience is, we had originally cast this as risk when we first did this research a couple of years ago. And ultimately we expanded the aperture because resilience includes things like risk, but it also includes stuff like employee retention, or attrition. It can include things like financial risk, legal risk, brand and reputational risk. So there's lots of different components. Effectively, think of these as the big things the executives have to care about. And you want your CX improvements to relate to that. If you're thinking less about a specific improvement and more about like what my team does, I have a CX team, then you have to look at the things that your CX team is doing and see how it relates to these different levers. Because if you're working on something that's way over here in some other corner, but everyone else in the organization is focused on these things, then you are in a corner. And that's not where you want to be. You want to be with everyone else. Now, the CX business case levers are actually pretty similar for government. And what I'm going to show you is effectively a preview of some research that Colleen Fazio, another former Govy like me, will be presenting when we get to our CX Summit North America in June. We're hoping to publish this research around about the middle of June. And some of what I'm going to be showing you later is also adapted from other research that was published by my colleague, Ricardo Pasto, who operates out of our Sydney, Australia office, and who built a bunch of tools that we have available for our clients. So I'm giving you some little pieces. You'll get the PDF of this so that you'll be able to look through and maybe use some of the templates if they're useful for you. So those business case levers are pretty darn similar. Instead of talking about revenue, we're talking about increasing participation. So this can include revenue, but it also includes things like engagement and compliance and getting folks to just be willing to work with that particular agency or organization. We don't talk about cost, we talk about optimizing efficiency, because there's lots of different things that roll up into that middle bucket. But it's not always about reducing, sometimes it's just about refining. And we keep resilience, because resilience still matters. Now, if we break this down further and we look at much more specific examples of each of these, right? Increasing participation, optimizing efficiency, and increasing resilience, we see a bunch of different things emerge. Now, this is not a full list. This is a starter pack that you can use. From participation, we start with compliance, right? The likelihood that customers are going to follow the government organization's advice and directives. Because ultimately, if you are going to make a customer experience improvement, and it's going to get people to be more willing to do a thing that you need them to do, great, that's what you want to do. That helps you achieve your mission. We also look at uptake. So customers engaging with the organization for authoritative information or to use optional services. Not every single thing that a government does is going to be used by every single person that exists within our borders, but they have access to optional services that they may want to take up. And certainly the government is often a great source of information. And so you want the residents of this country to take advantage of all of that goodness. We do have to look at revenue. Now, outside of the US, revenue, depending upon which different region you're looking at, they may talk about it differently, but the same basic concept still exists. There are going to be things like compulsory payments, fines, taxes, fees, that sort of thing that are levied that are required. And that's revenue, right? We have to think about that. But then we also have to think about the things that are optional. Like, you don't have to get a passport. You don't have to get a driver's license. But when you do, because you need one of those for a thing you're trying to accomplish, that's an optional thing that comes at a fee. And so the willingness to pay for those things is useful. And if we, if people sort of struggle with that, also think about, like, if you're going to the Department of Motor Vehicles, if you decide that you're going to get some kind of a vanity plate, whether it's getting one that has some pretty picture on it or something that has a very specific message on it, those come at an additional cost. That's revenue that's coming into that agency. And then the last example that I have here for participation is really going to be about distribution. And this is where we're bringing in other agencies, partners, and having them participate in the distribution and the service delivery. So the ability to stitch these things together. And, as Dominic was talking about earlier, customer experience existed within the first Trump administration. And we've seen over the last two administrations now, this focus on journeys. And this is one of those places where that can come in. Now, admittedly, performance.gov is still waiting on the new priorities from the current administration. But once those come in, I wouldn't be surprised if you see something like that. And again, you want to connect the work that you want to do or that you're currently doing to the priorities of the administration. When we look at optimizing efficiency, now we're talking about costs. So things like cost of serving customers, cost of sales and marketing, which marketing in a government context, yes, the government markets all the time. All kinds of communications, promotions, all of that. The cost of those things, where you can be more effective and more efficient in how you're putting the messages out and the messages that you're using themselves, that's all about efficiency. The cost of developing and launching new programs, services, and products, if you can reduce the time that it takes to get an idea from that, idea stage, from being on the drawing board out to market, that is an efficiency gain. And certainly looking at things around operating costs. How many people does it take for you to do a particular thing, which may or may not be directly serving a customer, but is certainly related to the operation of the overall agency. And then on the resilience side, we look at things like continuity of operations and risk mitigation, which I understand risk, for those that don't play in it all the time, the word risk is a deeply unsexy thing. But for those of us that have been in the risk world like I have, it's actually really important. And so to the extent that you can do things like increase the accuracy of forms that are coming in, you are helping to mitigate risk. You're also probably making things a lot more efficient because there's less time spent chasing bad information. Trust and reputation follows from all the goodness that gets done, but it's important to have the trust of the residents, of the people who are using the products and services, who are within our purview, and that you have a reputation that makes folks want to engage with you. So you can see the connection between some of these pieces and other pieces on this board. They do really go together. Employee and partner experience is also important because as much as you're able to attract and retain great employees, you have the ability to maintain more level and consistent great services. And I understand right now there's a lot going on at the moment. So this may not feel like that's a thing that you'd want to focus on. That's okay. This is a large list of stuff. And this is part of a piece of research that's for a global client set for Forrester. So some of these things may not apply to you and some of them may, and that's okay. Take from it what you need. Sustainable development is another example for resilience, in particular when we think about economic development, when we think about safety. Colleen and I have spoken with a number of different agencies that are focused on things like transportation. And for them, safety is a huge deal. So even doing things like changing the messaging or like when I was a couple months ago, I saw the new design for the MBTA's Green Line trolleys. They're trying to increase the safety by making it easier for people to know where to board, how to board, all of that. And then lastly, we get to equity and accessibility. Understanding again that this is a global piece of research and that it may not feel like that currently applies to the US market. But also without using the words, there is still the same need for people to be able to access the products and the services that the government offers. And whether you use a specific acronym or not, that need will not change. We're still human beings. So however you play it, there are lots of different options here for you to pick from this menu. And you can pick multiple things, and you may find that one particular item that you want to work on is actually going to hit on a bunch of different things, or it may hit on one. Doesn't matter. Just find something where you can relate it even just to the top line of participation, efficiency, and resilience. Now, as some examples, we have Caltrain. This is one for increasing participation. Caltrain is the rail system that runs over in the Bay Area in California, and they recently transitioned to an all-electric train set as part of a modernization and electronification process. So they went away from diesel, and went straight to electric. And the idea was they were promising faster, cleaner, quieter, and more frequent trains. And it worked. The ridership actually increased 17% in 4 months at a time when typically between August and October, they see a drop. They actually saw more than 100,000 more riders coming on. And even if we were going to say, yeah, that's probably just return to the office and it's probably not about that, their weekend ridership also went up year over year, anywhere from 142 to 169%, depending upon the day of the week. Now, the trains themselves don't actually run any faster. They run at the exact same speed as they did when they were diesel. The primary difference is for that one engine is the fact that they're able to start faster and they're able to stop faster. So they've been able to lower the time that it takes to get between San Francisco and San Jose to less than an hour. So they're able to increase frequency. They're able to make a better customer experience because people can get from point A to point B a lot faster than they used to be able to. And it's also hitting on sustainability targets. So again, lots of really great benefits. It's not necessarily just one thing, it's multiple things. From an efficiency perspective, I actually want to go about halfway across the world over to Australia Post, which is kind of sort of like the Postal Service over here. The challenge for them was that they were seeing the same problems that their business customers were seeing, in that there was a decline in brick and mortar usage. People were using digital channels and buying online, and they were expecting fast, fast, fast. But so then that meant that the business customers were also needing fast, fast, fast. And the postal office, Australia Post, needed to understand what was happening across all these different digital channels. And they didn't have that view previously. So what they did was they built a CRM platform that gave them a 360-degree view with dashboards and improved customer management, and not just helping the folks inside, although it certainly helped their employees, but it also helped their customers by giving them things like real-time credit assessment and complaint status notification. So if you put in a ticket, it would notify you when there was some kind of a change. And that credit assessment, that used to be something where a business owner would have to go to the post office, get paperwork, fill out the paperwork, turn it back into the post office, and then wait for a determination. Now it's happening digitally in real time. And what they were able to do was increase their self-service options from exactly none to 50% of the things that they offer. And they were hoping to save maybe like 10 days off of their customer setup time. They saved nearly a month. So huge improvements. The organization benefits from it. Customers are benefiting from it, right? You see this win-win scenario emerging. And then the last example that I want to share is from the government of Singapore. They've set up what they call SingPass, which is this sort of like one-stop shop. It's the way to be able to use the resident's national identity card for single sign-on to all sorts of digital public services. They created this policy called No Wrong Door because they knew that their own residents didn't like the fact that they would go into like one agency and be told you need to go talk to somebody over there. And in particular, and I have some stats on this, nearly half of residents in one study said that they wanted to reduce the number of people that they speak to from different departments, and nearly 40% wanted more connectivity between government agencies. So they were really looking for the government to do better, be better, all of that. So doing this no wrong door policy that routes residents to wherever they need to go, regardless of which agency they come into, regardless of which channel they started from, addressed a top CX pain point, and now 82% of Singaporeans believe that their government is a world leader in CX quality. So we're seeing that reputational benefit that came about as a result of making those changes. So you need to know how you're going to tell your particular ROI story. The examples I've given are vignettes. And frankly, when I talk with folks that are on boards of directors or who are in the C-suite, a vignette is good enough. They're looking for something that's short and sweet and easy to consume. So I recommend using a 3-step process to create your own CX ROI story. The first step is to inventory the key outcome metrics that matter. So we're going to start from the top. The second is to identify the CX actions that are going to connect to those key outcome metrics. And the third is to craft a 1-sentence business case. So if we take this template here for example, you want to inventory the metrics that matter. So you start with those business case levers, you look at the examples of the kinds of things that you could be looking for, and you start to fill in this template with the things that you know are important to your organization. So I know my organization really cares about the number of net new licenses issued going up because that's an important revenue marker for us. Or thinking about efficiency, we want to decrease the application processing time because it's going to help us lower our operating costs. Or maybe from a resilience perspective, we want a more thorough screening process because we believe that's going to be a safer thing. So now how do we identify the customer experience actions that are going to get us there? Well, we take those things and we translate them onto the next template where we're actually connecting the dots between those two things. So let's say that we fill in that first one, that net new licenses issued. We know that's from that participation business case lever. We know it's going to help us move the needle on revenue. But what do we have to do to make that happen? Well, we're going to develop a user-friendly digital license application. And it's going to have lookups that increase the data accuracy and that decrease the user cognitive load, right? Make it simpler, make it easier. They only have to put in just the stuff that we don't know, and then we're good. And by doing that, by making it easy, people will do more of that stuff online. From an efficiency perspective, let's say we're talking about that decreased application process time, and we want to reduce the operating costs. Well, we're probably going to want to implement some kind of journey analytics that evaluate the customer journey and the employee journey so that we can identify, resolve, and monitor the pain points that exist in that application process. And it's not a typo to say customer and employee journeys. If we think about a typical journey map where you're describing all the different things that a customer is going through, all the steps that they have to take as they're trying to achieve a specific goal or complete a specific task, and we're thinking about all the emotions that they're experiencing along the way, we also have to map what's happening below the waterline. Because the things that are happening with the employees as they're intersecting with that customer's journey, those also matter. Because if you think about it from the perspective of like a duck, you see a duck or a swan gliding beautifully across the water, but it's paddling furiously. If you've made a great customer experience that relies on killing your employees, there's a problem here. So you have to look at the employee journey. And then if we look at that last example, a more thorough screening process, well, maybe let's start with some ethnographic studies to understand what customers' tolerance is for secondary screenings and the potential messaging that will increase compliance, make people feel more comfortable. What does the experience have to be? What can it be? What's the art of the possible? And then from there, once you've connected all of these dots, now you want to write it up. This is where you need to have something that you can express quickly in an email, that you can say when you're in an elevator, only going from one floor to maybe 2 floors up. It needs to be short and sweet. So for example, the CX team will support this program, organization, audience, whatever it is, through some kind of an action, which will result in some kind of a change in a specific outcome metric and help the organization achieve some kind of a desired outcome. Now, this is a slightly modified version of the standard one-sentence business case that's used by Forrester's consulting team, that's used in our research, that we use with the private sector. And normally we'll throw in like a % ROI or something like that. Frankly, build it out with as many numbers as you possibly can. But this is just sort of a base template to get you started. So if we take one of the examples that we've already used so far, we can say the CX team will support the licensing program through developing a user-friendly digital license application, which will result in, and remember, we were thinking about all these outcomes, 75% higher data accuracy and 50% lower app abandonment. And you don't have to be perfect here, but you have to have something that feels credible, that a reasonable person wouldn't say is wrong, and that you believe you can actually achieve, and help the organization increase net new license applications. When I talk with folks in the private sector about how to identify these pressure points that they want to push on, I tell them to look at strategy decks and anything that's coming out of their C-suite and their board, because those are the words that their executives are using. And if you're parroting those words back to them, then they understand that you understand the assignment, that you know what they want you to do. So you have to be able to connect those dots reasonably. Which then begs the question, are you ready to tell your CX ROI story? Remember that your story is only as good as the data and the connections that you can express. You can't expect your audience to act on minimal data. What I've just shown you is perfectly sufficient for pretty much any organization, but you may find that depending upon your organization, you need more, you need less. But you can't expect a green light if your audience doesn't see the same thing that you see. So if you come at them chart first and don't understand why they're sending you away, look at it from their perspective. Are you giving them enough information to make a reasonable decision? And so then you look across all these different tools and say, all right, where can I inject data into this story? And what kinds of data can I use? There are lots of different things, some of which you may have ready access to, some of which you may not. And you have to figure out how you can work your network to get the things that you need. For example, there's going to be customer data. So what do you already know about the customers that you have and the customers that you're trying to obtain? What operational data do you have that shows you how many clicks it takes to do a thing, or how long a particular process takes, how many days it takes to resolve a specific thing or to process an application? Financial data that shows when monies tend to flow in and what those flows really look like, because they may change from quarter to quarter or month to month. And you need to understand the seasonality of these things and also what the goals are that you're trying to achieve. You want to look at qualitative data. So in particular, if you're doing any kind of surveys, any open-ended question responses that help you understand the context that folks are coming at you with, the sentiment, all of that's really important, which leads into other unstructured data. It could be coming from social, it could be coming from calls that are coming in, like lots of different places. As many sources as you can. And then there's also the possibility that you need to use synthetic data to construct something using an AI algorithm to determine what a customer could be, particularly if you're trying to do something speculative. And if you don't know how to do any of this stuff, odds are somebody in your organization does. There are also consultancies that focus specifically on how to help you pull these things together, and they can even help you with generating that synthetic data. So to kind of wrap it up with a bow, 3 things to think about. Number 1, you want to make it measurable and meaningful. It needs to be something you can quantify and something where you can demonstrate that what's in it for me, for that other person you're trying to convince to either let you keep your program, let you proceed with a particular thing, whatever it may be. You want to create a short and sweet CX ROI story. And you can make that 1-sentence business case for lots of things. Or you can try and roll it up and say, we're doing all of these things, which is helping us with this, and it's helping us with this top line goal. And use a variety of data sources. Don't just lean on your surveys. Look at operational data, look at financial data, look at customer data. Grab whatever you can. Augment with snippets from a contact center. Calls can be a huge source of really, really rich context and examples that can help move people's emotions and get them to go in the direction that you need them to. So with all that said, which is a lot, let's move into questions. I know we have like about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we can use that.
Great. Thank you, Judy. That was tremendous. I love measurable, meaningful. I love the example at the end of sort of accessing the wealth of insight that exists within the contact center. Obviously, Martha and team are planning this contact center summit coming up. I wonder if you could speak to, and everybody, please feel free to either raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and we'll get to those as well. But I feel like there's different levels at which you have to tell this CX story, right? And I'm thinking of an example of a conversation that I was involved in where we're trying to access the wealth of insight that exists inside of the contact center, and we have perhaps colleagues and stakeholders say, listen, we're overwhelmed with call center volume, we don't have time to engage. How do you tell this story at varying levels for stakeholders, not just to the executive to gain buy-in, maintain buy-in for the program at large, but gain buy-in and partnership from colleagues for particular initiatives? Does that story vary at all? And maybe you could tell, maybe there's an example of how you could tailor that story effectively to gain that type of buy-in and participation.
Oh yeah, for sure. Actually going back to my own experience running a CX team and talking with the folks who are in the contact center, and they're basically overwhelmed at all times. So the challenge there is not to make it about me, it's about them. So understanding when they say we're overwhelmed, we have too many calls coming in. Okay, what are the top 3 reasons that people are calling the contact center? And then we can understand, okay, from a health insurer perspective, it's typically benefits and eligibility, it's things around billing and, general coverage, real standard stuff. Okay, so now let's pick those apart. Are they happening in one specific product line? Are they happening across all product lines? All right, now that I have an understanding of that, where can I have other data? Who can I wrap into this so I can help them? Because the odds are, if I can get a win with them, even to lean a little bit of the calls out that they're getting that they don't need to be taking, maybe because members don't realize that they could do something online that they thought that they could only do over the phone or whatever it may be, then I've made a friend because I've just made their life a little bit easier. So this is that what's in it for me. We have to focus on just asking that question, how can I help you with that? And it's rather than what CX teams tend to do when they're less mature, which is I've got all this data, I'm going to bring it to you and I'm going to show it to you and you're going to do something as a result of it. Meanwhile, they have the virtual stack of paperwork on their own desk that they're trying to deal with. Their inbox is full. So you have to figure out how you can take things out. And it's that question, like, how can I help you? What can I do? And that ends up framing it much nicer. And frankly, you can do that with any level of the organization below just about the board of directors.
Fantastic. I love that. No, that's very important because I think, yeah, as I mentioned, there's these different levels at which you have to kind of tell those stories for the different audiences. There's different contexts within which you have to tell those stories. I think you and I have chatted about this. I often talk about kind of like your 30-second elevator pitch, your 2-minute story walking down the hallway with your senior leader, and then maybe you're taking this out on a roadshow or trying to gain buy-in from another program or line of business within the organization and get them to participate. I think, you know, having that one sentence business case, but then being able to blow that out and expand it and tell that story at different levels and different contexts, absolutely critical. I think, you know, I'm a big believer in storytelling generally as a great enabler to CX success, right? Not just in trying to gain buy-in, but then telling your success story, right? So that you maintain momentum and so that's great. We have a question about sharing the presentation. I don't know,
Yes.
because this is coming research, you know, you can
Yeah,
speak to
no,
that.
I set it up specifically so that I could PDF it and send it over to you so you can distribute
fantastic.
to everyone. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Excellent. Are there any questions? Does anybody want to come off mute and ask a question of Judy?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's Chris Bobbitt with Technical Ascent. Hi, Judy. Thanks,
Hi.
Steve. So in the case where you're faced with, where someone is faced with multiple competing opportunities to try to make improvements kind of in their organization, what advice what kind of like thought framework would you give to someone in that situation to at least help them shrink the list to something that's manageable?
Yeah. So I write about prioritization and I'm currently in the process of updating all of that research. So it's all super fresh. There are different levels of CX prioritization. So at a base level, you want to balance out what the customer needs with what the organization is trying to achieve. When we go farther up, now we start to think about, is this something we can even do? So at the intermediate level, we think about what's the customer impact, what's the organizational impact, and what's the feasibility of the thing. At the highest level, and frankly, where I put anybody who's heavily regulated, which is also where I put my government organizations, you want to look at across a minimum of 4 things, preferably 5. So the first is going to be customer impact. So how important is this to the customer? And there are a bunch of questions under that. Business impact or the organizational impact. We're going to look at feasibility, but we're also going to look at risk. We have to look at risk because we have to think about what regulation is this helping us resolve, or if there's a specific missive that came out of Congress, you want to be able to address that. You know, something where the agency or the organization has been tasked with something very specific, where there's an audit finding or something like that. You have to account for that there. And then the 5th category is more for the private sector, but it's about ROI. We tend not to talk about ROI in government because it can seem crass, because then we start talking about revenue and some people get itchy about that. But the ROI could potentially just be framed as, this is the efficiency that we're going to be able to gain, or this is the additional incremental revenue that we're going to gain from changing this one particular thing. So that's that framework: customer impact, organizational impact, feasibility, risk, ROI, and then the pieces that come under that are really, really important. There's no one perfect way to prioritize, but you have a finite set of money, and so and a finite set of resources. So you have to think about what's good for the customer, what's going to meet organizational goals, what can we reasonably accomplish, what accounts for risks, regulations, audits, all of that. And to the extent that it makes sense for your organization, what's going to help us achieve some kind of decent return on the investment that we're putting in.
I'd love to ask a follow-up on risk, Steve, if there's time for that. But I also see there's maybe some other questions in the chat, so I defer to you as a moderator for this.
Please go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
So you talked about a number of different kinds of things in in risk, right? Like there's one view of risk that's just like it's around addressing uncertainty. And I think that some of the things that you talked about, right, like statutory mandates, some kind of regulatory driver or something else, these start to, you're presenting a much more expansive concept of risk here. Can you spend a minute kind of breaking risk down into a couple of components?
I mean, sure. There's at a base level, there's operational risk, there's financial risk, there's reputational risk, there's legal risk, there's regulatory risk, right? Like there are all these different kinds of risks. For those that don't play in risk and that haven't had the joy of being a business risk analyst like I have, you can't actually eliminate a risk. You can only mitigate it. So this is all about how much do you understand all of these different kinds of risks, operational, financial, all of that, and to what extent is the thing that you're going to be working on going to mitigate that? And that's a key consideration. It's not the only consideration, but it's a key consideration. That particular description that I have of those 5 different categories of prioritization criteria, that's part of the advanced CX prioritization model that Forrester has. And that also includes weighting. So we're expecting to weight each of the criteria. We're expecting to apply a weight to each of the criteria categories as well. And for some agencies, risk may be more of an issue, and you'd want to give, a heavier weight to that. For others, it may be more about the organizational things and the impact to the organization's goals, and you may want to give more weight to that. So those risks as well, you can say, I want to give more weight to legal and financial and less so to operational. And you sort of pick which way you want to go.
Okay, that was really helpful. I appreciate it, Judy.
Yeah, no worries.
And thanks.
Absolutely. Anybody else on the phone? Dr. Gary Powell, please go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much. I love your framework, Judy. So question, when you present the different ways in which CX can essentially move the needle in those different areas, when you do get pushback and the leader says, well, I can do that without CX, typically, what are the ways that they feel that they can accomplish the same business goals and move those needles through other means? Generally speaking, what are those other means tend to be that then we need to overcome and say, well, yeah, that's nice, but CX can do it better? Over.
It's not necessarily that CX can do it better. It's just a consideration, right? So like more often than not, someone will say, well, why do I need your team to do it? I could probably just have a piece of software that would do that, right? I'm going to replace everybody with an AI. It sounds fine until the rubber actually meets the road, and then you realize that the AI is going to tell you to do something like eat rocks. So when you're trying to counter those types of arguments, you want to understand, so why do you think software is going to do a better job? Or why do you think this other thing is going to do a better job? And you have to have a ready case for why your team is going to be the answer. CX in and of itself is this amorphous concept. And when we talk about CX as a philosophy, as an approach, we describe it at Forrester as the sum of all the perceptions that a customer has about every interaction that they have with an organization. So a CX team or a CX function, a CX program is there to enable a greater understanding and more thoughtful design of those experiences. So they're all connected. The organization is able to achieve its goals, and it's helping to support mission success and organizational success. It's not just about making an NPS better. So I would sort of throw the question back to you and say the thing you're going to have to consider when you're walking into that are, what are all the possible reasons that someone would say no? What does your team not have to be able to implement that? Can a piece of software do your job? Because if it can, then you need a different angle. Or is there another team in the organization that is really good at analytics and they can do this? And if so, should you merge with them? Should you be working with them and partnering with them? Like, what are the possible objections, and how do you resolve that? How do you justify the team that you have doing it? And then you should be better prepared. You sort of interrogate yourself as you're coming into it.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, no worries.
Martha, go ahead. I think we probably have time for one more. Andrea, I think I know I see your question here around storytelling. If you want to jump on, kind of shed a little bit more light and context to that question, that'd be great. But maybe and hopefully we can get to it. But Martha, why don't you pose your question, and then we'll try to get to Andrea as the final.
I was just going to wrap up the Dr. Powell's
Yeah, please.
comment and Judy's answer, and I think it gets to the heart of if someone says other things can do it better than CX. I mean, CX is, as you said, this amorphous collection. Maybe what they're talking about is part of the customer experience toolkit, right? And I think it's, and you know, and I know people are tired of hearing me say this, but I think just using the term CX for CX sake, it is doing us not any favors, right? So it's really using these practices, strategies, tactics, tools, technologies that fall under this amorphous umbrella to help meet the mission needs, as you said. So if somebody says, if you are presenting yourself as I'm the CX team and I can do design and I can do, and that's not going to cut it. People are going to have lots of different options on the ways that they can solve the problem in a quicker way. And especially when you say, I need 6 months to do discovery, right? That doesn't, that's not, going to work in these currently. May work in the future, but it's not going to work currently. Are you am I looking at it correctly? And I think you answered it pretty well.
Yeah, I think you're looking at it exactly the right way. And to a certain extent, you just have to be prepared for, like, why should it be my team? Why are we the ones to do this? What's our approach? I do talk with CX teams that have their own vision for what their role is within their organization. And whether you craft something specific or whether you just sort of look at, like, why do we exist? What are we
Right.
here to do? What functions are we supposed to perform?
And they do have
Right.
specific functions, and that they are the only ones that know how to do, and
Right.
that's when they should be used. Don't look for the nail and think that's the CX is the hammer that hits everything, right? Like
Right.
sometimes you may not have the capabilities that are needed, but if you do, stand up for it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
CX should not be the solution in search of a problem.
Right. Thank you.
Great. I know we have a couple of extra questions, Dominic. Do we have time to get to these, or do we want to kind of get written answers to some of these questions? And we can
do either. I mean, so I think we're at the hour, so I think we can turn off the recording